Good morning, campers, and welcome to Radio Camp Half-Blood, a Percy Jackson read-along podcast. I'm B.
And I'm Zach.
And this week, we read chapters 7 and 8 of The Lost Hero.
Yes, and this week's chapter, you ready for this one, B?
Oh, yeah.
Jason gets Bedhead.
Oh, that's pretty good. Yeah. Yeah, I was trying, it's now that we've started doing this, I can't help but, brainstorm, what would I title the chapter. For a split second, I forgot that it wasn't my turn. I was like, wait, what would I name this? But then I remembered it was your turn.
See, it's hard because the first thing I was thinking about was something with the sausages, and I'm like, okay, how can I...
Yeah.
Okay, how can I have a pun with sausages in it? Because it's so ridiculous. But no, we didn't do anything with sausages because the majority of this book takes place in a bed. Whew. I'm sure I just made someone yawn.
Oh my god, you're gonna make me yawn.
You know what? Okay, I think I yawned last week on a show. It might have been this one or the last one, and I remember driving in the car listening to it.
Oh no, you made me yawn. You did it.
Yes. Hypno strikes again, everybody.
I'm very susceptible to that.
Yeah, I'm acceptable. You're susceptible. I love it. It's great. It's terrible. It's a terrible thing to do to people.
Yeah. I knew this one really, borderline kind of, let's just say, problem child in high school, and he would intentionally yawn in class to try and manipulate other people to yawn, because he was kind of, I don't know, he had serial killer energy is all I'm saying. You know what I mean? One of those people.
Sad thing is I'm trying to hold back a yawn right now. It's like that weird threshold, it's holding back the gates. Oh, man. So, B, what happened in this chapter? Because a whole lot happened in this chapter.
Yeah, so it's chapters 7 and 8. They're both Jason chapters. So we get to see what's happening with him in camp, because we've already touched on what happened with Leo and with Piper. So I guess these chapters are kind of concurrent, which is an interesting thing about having 3 characters, because I think the timeline isn't exactly oh, this happens, then this happens, because a lot of it is overlapping, I guess, time-wise.
A lot of it is kind of in the chapter that we had is this splitting branches. Jason goes to see Chiron, Piper goes to pretty much hang out with Annabeth, and then Leo gets to hang out with Hephaestus' cabin. And they kind of happen at the exact same time.
At the exact same time. Yeah, it reminds me of Unfortunate Events when they're in the penultimate peril.
Oh, and you said, what is that on the other side of the ranch? What is the phrasing they say? It's
meanwhile back at the ranch.
Yeah, meanwhile back at the ranch.
And it's with the in the show, at least, with the wrong. Well, I guess it was in both, but regardless, it's all happening at the same time, and there's a split screen. It's concurrently, all these 3 characters are doing these different things. It kind of reminds me of that a little bit, because it's all important to the plot, so it's kind of happening all at once, which we kind of find out at the end of chapter 8 when we see Rachel again, and she's sort of talking. You're connecting the dots of all these things happening, right? Which I kind of find pretty satisfying.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that. And also, when it comes to it, what I like about this, having, the branching of paths, you're seeing things from people's different perspectives, as well as, the one thing I was looking at was how Rick would approach, because there's this thing in D&D called metagaming, because everyone's at the table and you might have an individual scene, people might pretend oh, I already know what's happened, but the information might not be passed to them.
No, exactly.
You can't do that. And you know what? Rick Riordan does a really good job with not having, the metagame. No,
I was going to mention that. Yeah, for instance, when we're talking about Jason in these 2 chapters, when he sees Rachel, even though us as an audience has been introduced to Rachel, he calls her the red, I guess the narration about what he's perceiving is, oh, that's a redhead. It's not, oh, that's Rachel, because there would be no way for him to know that. Yeah. Also complicated because his memory's erased, but it's kind of cool that you see these different perspectives. So we already know what happened with Piper, right? We read her perspective chapters a couple chapters ago, and we know that she fainted because of the knife and everything happening with that. But then we go over to Jason, he doesn't know that happened, so all of a sudden it's news to him, so it's kind of interesting to see this all concurrently happen.
Well, there's a lot that happens with that, especially the one thing I was really impressed about is this is an old DM trick where even Rick Riordan kind of does. It's oh yeah, by the way, while we were running, Rachel filled me in on her name, so I now know her name is Rachel. There's things those little details, obviously Rick Riordan either has been a dungeon master or just knows how to like
It does.
fill
It
in those
feels sort of
gaps
gamified a little bit. So
There's,
anyway,
it's a little gamified. Yeah.
Here's a brief synopsis. Should I just synopsize
the first
7?
one chapter.
Yeah,
The first
okay.
chapter, please.
So we last left him off with the very annoying Drew, who's this Aphrodite camper who's
the mean girl.
Who's mean and has a crush on him, and she's like kind of a jerk about Piper and is like leading him to the big house, and he's getting a really bad feeling about the whole thing. He like looks up at the big house, and even though it looks very cute and he says that it looks like a place where retirees would sit and drink prune juice, he's getting this foreboding feeling, and we know that there's something about his past that isn't quite what it seems. He sees Chiron, and again, this is kind of fun because we know who Chiron is. We're used to him being a centaur, but in this case, Jason's like, that guy's part horse. What a novelty.
And there isn't like that weird type of reaction either where it's just like, oh my god, you're a horse. Then I looked up, he just accepts it instantly. Like, yeah, I've seen some weird stuff today.
Right. Well, yeah, that's another interesting thing about this chapter is Jason sort of is perceiving some things new, but at the same time, he's sort of acclimated to the idea of gods existing, which we'll get into as he talks to Chiron. So he sees Chiron, he's in his centaur form, then he sort of folds up into his wheelchair, and they go into the big house to have a conversation. He sends Drew away, much to her chagrin, because she keeps like aggressively flirting with him and like saying that Piper is gross or whatever. But you know, it's fine. I meant to mention, Drew briefly talks about how it's like gross to date someone in your same cabin. So we've talked about this sort of. So I guess like you're technically not related if you're all demigods, but you're only related if you have the same godly parent, I guess. I don't exactly know how it works, but this is how she explains it.
They talked about it in The Last Olympian, and kind of like we needed to have like that, pretty much that reevaluation of it, because this is more of a romance novel, or at least now that they're teenagers, there's more like YA stuff to it. There's going to be some romance, so they have to set those ground rules really quickly.
Yeah, so it's not like, wait a second, aren't you related? So yeah, that we get that out of the way. She gets sent away. They walk into the big house, which has since been kind of redecorated. It's like a forest of leaves, and there's a lot of masks on the wall. And I guess this is Mr. D's parting gift. For some reason, he left a bunch of masks and a lot of like vines and things as a memento, I guess. And of course, there's the weird leopard head that he found at a garage sale and then made it alive, and they feed it sausages, which is kind of just a weird aside, I guess. So anyway, he's talking to Chiron, and Chiron is kind of interested in that. Well, first of all, he says you should be dead, so he seems to sort of recognize Jason, but we're not really told why he recognizes Jason, and Chiron says that he's sworn to secrecy, essentially. So there's something going on here, but there's like, he swore on the river Styx that he can't elaborate about that. And then again, Jason shouldn't be alive. That's the first thing he says is you shouldn't be alive. He can't tell him why. So it's very spooky. Then time freezes, and a god appears, who I guess later we find out is Juno/Hera, which is kind of the same god, but not really. It's complicated. Literally in the midst of Chiron being like, who would bring you here? That's when that happens. Time resumes, and Jason is like, so I guess it was probably her. Chiron kind of thinks he knows what's going on, but he can't tell them about it. And then Annabeth? Nope, that's wrong. Yeah. And then
Annabeth Choss.
So that sounds like a ship name for something. Anyway.
No, it sounds like a meme, like when you have like those really poorly drawn figures.
Oh yeah, like Spooderman or something. Anyway, so it sort of seems like Chiron's gonna get into it, but he's again sworn to secrecy about the whole situation with Jason, and so he bursts in. So then Annabeth bursts in and is like, oh, Piper had a vision and she's maybe dead. She's kind of in a coma. We don't exactly know. So that's where we leave off with chapter 7.
Yeah, there's a lot that I liked about this chapter, especially when it comes down to like how it's almost like it fills in the blanks. Like we meet Chiron again, but there's so much more mystery to it because we've never seen Chiron like sworn to secrecy in this way. Like he's a really bad liar. Like we've seen him with the Great Prophecy, and he's kind of like alludes to it a little bit. But that's kind of the problem with it, isn't it? Is that when it comes down to it, that Chiron is supposed to be our, our father figure, but now that we have a new character that has no real relation, it's almost like a different type of perspective, and I like that.
Yeah, it's also pretty aggravating because he normally either fills us in for the most part with what he already knows, or he doesn't know, and that's like kind of at least somewhat reassuring because it's like it's less frustrating than like knowing that Chiron has that information about what's happening but like can't divulge it, because it's a very convenient thing that we have the swearing on the river Styx thing where I guess you can't break that bond.
It's a really big taboo. It's a no-no.
It's a real no-no. Exactly. I mean, that's why Percy makes all of the gods swear on the river Styx when they make the promise.
There was also something that really struck me about this chapter, as well as with the beginning with Drew, and that is kind of like, I don't know if Rick Riordan was doing this intentionally, but it was like kind of like teenager play on like people advancing on someone they just can't take the hint that they're not interested.
Yeah.
To the point of where it just becomes really, really uncomfortable. Like I was getting really uncomfortable in that whole situation, and it was an interesting juxtaposition from like when we think about like Aphrodite kids, like we are so used to like Selena and these people being very laissez-faire, but when you have someone like Drew that's like super duper aggressive, it's like it can be a very scary thing.
Yeah, so there's something that I guess Jason's narration says something to the effect of like, oh, Drew, she seemed pretty, but she was like trying to get his attention. It made him uncomfortable. There's also kind of like the interesting tension of her asking, oh, well, don't tell me you and Piper. And then he kind of doesn't know how to answer that because like they're not really dating. And that probably was just the mist lying, but we don't exactly know what was happening there. But he feels a certain debt to her because they've already been through this whole thing at the Grand Canyon. So it's like a complicated thing where they're like, it's like Schrodinger's date or something, like where they're kind of are not dating, but like she felt like they were, and it's very weird. And yeah.
The way that I would put it is would they, won't they? But each time you say the names, there's like a question mark. Would they, won't they? Because you don't know. That's an interesting...
Did they? It's more like, did they? Don't they?
Yeah. Yeah, and also, like, when it comes to, like, what I like about Jason's narration, like, he's so, like, I don't know what's going on in the situation to the point of where
he's a bit of a broken record, honestly. It's very funny when people are like, well, do you know where you're from? Do you know this? And he's like, I don't remember anything. Every time you ask, I tell you, I don't remember.
Yeah, and there's even, like, there's a moment in here that, like, really struck me, like, he almost gives into, like, this weird temptation, but he's like, no, I'm good, and, they kind of like move on to the point of where the narration goes back to Chiron. He's like, oh, you should be dead. Get out of here, Drew. We need to further the plot in such a different way.
Yeah, I'm glad that Chiron just straight up doesn't have time for her. Like, listen, there's bigger things than your like weird crush on this guy.
She's also like, she feels like a groupie too, because she's like, I know you're going to be super special.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. Yes, because he seems powerful or something, and she keeps staring above his head waiting for him to be claimed, and it's like it's something beyond just a crush. It's also just kind of like creepy, like fetishizing his like power or something, which felt uncomfortable.
I think that's kind of like the whole grasp of the scene, is because now that we have this new thing where everyone has to be claimed, there's almost now this new set of problems about like, oh, because everyone gets to be claimed, it's almost like this weird hierarchy almost a little bit.
Right, because then everybody knows where they belong, and I guess like, oh, based on your godly parent, there is still sort of like a caste system regardless of whether or not, like before it used to be like a lot of kids weren't claimed, and then the claimed kids kind of felt a little bit of superiority, and now it seems like depending on who your godly parent is, there's some superiority, so it's like still kind of the same.
There's a lot of that. What I like a lot what Rick does with, because for me, I don't really like the amnesia trope a lot because it can get really annoying really quickly, and you obviously know eventually they'll probably get their memories back in some way, shape, or form. But what I really like about Jason's is that he has like these weird like fugue states where he remembers things almost through like pure instinct. And that is so interesting to me.
Right. That's it. That's a kind of interesting thing is his memory isn't completely wiped. It's sort of complicated because he remembers like vague things about the world that they live in, but it's not quite the same. He doesn't remember Greek names so much as he remembers the Roman names, and he remembers Latin instead of Greek. And Chiron does this sort of like fun thing when they're in the middle of a conversation where he switches to Latin, and seamlessly Jason is speaking Latin and doesn't realize he is. So there's just this sort of like buried understanding. He knows that the gods exist. He maybe was claimed because Chiron even asked that, like, you must have been claimed if you were aware of this world and how it existed, and they're supposed to claim you, but it's not quite as easy as that because he doesn't remember anything. Yeah, there's something going on with Roman versus Greek that I guess we're going to get into because clearly Jason has some connection to that. He speaks Latin. He says the gods' names, like the
Roman equivalent.
The gods' names, the Roman equivalent, which is complicated because again, we'll get into chapter 8 when they kind of talk about how equivalent is not exactly
it's not
right
one
term
for
for that. Exactly. They're sort of shadow selves of each other. They're not exactly the same god.
The best way I've ever been told between the Roman gods and the Greek gods is that Romans were an interesting bunch because they would just like embrace culture in like this like very competitive way. I mean, we have the Colosseum, that case in point, but like they would take gods and make them almost like their OCs, but they try to make them as perfect as possible.
Right. They change them. We'll get into that once we get into chapter 8. But it's kind of interesting that like he has some understanding, and even like the way that he describes understanding that the gods are real. He says to Chiron, "Oh, well, I don't believe that we should be sacrificing to them or worshiping them, but they are important. And whether they traveled from Greece to Rome and now they're here." And then Chiron says something like, "Oh, I couldn't have said it better myself." Like he has this implicit understanding of how this world works, and yet he doesn't know who he is, which is kind of cool. And again, we'll get into why his memory is missing, which I guess has a lot to do with Juno/Hera, because she kind of appears in this vision and says that she's trapped. It's very vague, and then Chiron kind of seems to know what's going on, but he can't divulge.
Yeah, and there's also like that weird moment when he first steps into the big house and he's just like, I should not be here. Every molecule of my being says this is danger. Like the klaxons are going off like doot 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 doot. And
like
that's
everything feels wrong, right? And I think, and Chiron says that too, right? And then Jason seems kind of like sarcastic about it, where Chiron is just like, "You're not supposed to be here. It could be really dangerous. You could cause a catastrophe." And he's like, "Oh, wow, you're like a really inspiring teacher." Because, of course, he understands that he's Chiron. He's supposed to be this like great mentor of heroes.
And it's also funny because we look at this and Chiron even blatantly says, like, I really wish the Titan War was kind of like the end. We had like a time of peace. Now we're getting into the worst part. Like, my goal is just at this point is to retire so I can fade away. Like, I would really like that because, come on. See, there's that weird point of contention that I don't like in like sequel series where like when they happen like 5 minutes apart, where it's like, well, the bigger threat is actually was behind the scenes the entire time. Like that trope, I kind of. It's a catch-22. Like, I like letting things breathe a little bit.
I hope that after he succeeded in the Titan War and saved Mount Olympus, we might have some peace. I might be able to enjoy one final triumph, a happy ending, and perhaps retire quietly. I should have known better. The last chapter approaches just as it did before. The worst is yet to come. Very ominous, just as it did before.
Yeah, there's like that trope, and it's like for me, like I love that this series takes place. We still get to meet our favorite characters and such, but at the same time, like, I think this is kind of the problem with Korra in the sense of, like, there's, like, a 50-year gap between the original Avatar: The Last Airbender.
There isn't as much of, like, the aftermath, direct aftermath of that stuff.
Well, no, there's, like, there's that time of peace. So, like when it comes to anything in human history, it takes time for things to evolve and change.
Right.
So it's, like, camp culture isn't going to miraculously change in, like, a year and a half. Like, yes, there's gonna be a reconstruction.
Right, it hasn't even been a year, right? It's like been...
yeah, it hasn't even been a year. So like what we're seeing like right now, like we're noticing like these not discrepancies, but we're noticing like yes, there's new things in place, but it takes time for things to occur. So it's interesting that we have like the sequel series take place almost like the equivalent of like mere minutes after the last one.
Yeah, so it's not even really it is a new series, but just based on, these new characters and these new perspectives, but it is a continuation, yeah, which I kind of like. You don't normally get that. You might get like a spin-off or like a prequel or something, but it does feel like a true sequel in a lot of ways. It's kind of frustrating though, because I can also see the other side of it, where after spending so long reading Percy Jackson and the Olympians, it's kind of frustrating, much like you could imagine it's frustrating to the heroes in the story, where you go through this entire saga to, go on all these different quests and destroy Kronos, and it's like this big deal that you think, oh, we've kind of finally earned some peace for a while, and even Chiron wanted to believe that. And then it's like kind of for naught. I mean, at least Kronos has been defeated for now, but there is this other threat somewhere. So it's sort of like feels a little bit frustrating. Like, oh right, I guess that was just like the warm up for something even more intense.
Like normally, like rule of thumb, like I'm so used to like we had this thing. I don't know how it's gonna go now, but like we would have these like weird like sequel movies or like sequel trilogies. Like Star Wars is the one I would give. I could give like that's called The Passing of the Baton, or I guess they're called soft reboots, like Jurassic World and Jurassic Park. But like they're like spaced out. We're like 20, 30 years because the first movie was this year. 20, 30 years to that. But then you run into the issue of having like, oh, all of our favorite characters are, they've changed because now they're adults, and what do you do with that? But it's an interesting blend to have it.
It's such a time skip.
I don't mind time skips, but at the same time, I actually find it interesting that it's here. Like there isn't really a time skip, so all of our characters at least are going to pretty much be the same.
They don't get really a moment, which is kind of funny. And also, I mean, we get to see, like you said, the adjustment period, how the camp has changed and how it stayed the same, how, the culture of claiming your godly parent claiming you is kind of like changed the way campers treat each other, how it's made the camp more populated, even in the middle of winter. Those kinds of adjustments you get to see in the early stages, which is kind of fun.
If the series took place, let's say 20 years in the future, or actually let's be more gracious and say 30 years, like Percy Jackson and Annabeth have kids and their kids are there.
Yeah, that sounds like Cursed Child.
This does sound like Cursed Child, but what I'm saying here is like, then it would be a more interesting kind of story where you have like people like kids growing up and now integrated in almost like, oh, because everyone gets claimed, like, oh, because you're a son of Poseidon, you are basically high on the totem pole, whereas you're a son of Hypnos, and you're like, you're the sleepyhead cabin. Just go.
Right. Well, we'll talk about that in the next chapter.
But you know what I mean? Like it's interesting. Like we have it right now compared to like a 30-year difference where like camp culture would completely change. But also at the same time, Rick Riordan would also alienate a lot of kids because how are you going to write like future stuff? Because it's supposed to be like in the now.
Well, right. Because they also want kid characters probably still. And like Percy and Annabeth aren't entirely grown up yet, so you still have them as relatable characters.
This book also is a product of its time because there's the part where the kid from Hypnos Cabin's like, I had the most wonderful dream where I was on stage with Michael Jackson. Like, oh
yes,
yeah,
ooh. Yeah, that didn't
age well at all.
No, it didn't. Wait, was Michael Jackson alive when this book was written?
Yeah, because he died, I think 2009.
Okay, I don't remember.
I remember where I was when he died. I was playing Xbox Live.
I like remember it happening. I just don't remember what year it was, and I don't remember when this book was written. So I don't know if it was like concurrent or what the situation was.
It was 2009 because I remember because I was playing Gears of War 2. My friend had told me we were in an Xbox Live party, and I had just moved to a new house. Yeah, it's about 2009, 2010.
All right, so either way, it's kind of that we'll talk about the weirdness of the sleepyhead cabin, as you so aptly put it.
So B, what did you think about like the weird type of vision that Jason had? Because that was weird.
Yeah, oh right. So the leopard is involved, and out of its mouth appears a god who I guess we're presuming is Juno / Hera. We know it's Juno because she has...
Does she look like Ellen Page?
Yeah. She has, what is it? A pelt on her back?
Oh, no, it's a goat skin.
Goat skin, right. And I guess that's like a symbol of her. And Jason implicitly knows this, which again hints to his like weird understanding of certain things. And she says that she's in danger. She's in prison, basically, and that she's his patron, which is a complicated word that we haven't really discussed what that means in the lore. And Chiron kind of seems to know what this means, but again, can't tell him. So I don't know. It's not quite like the kind of vision that Rachel would have. It's a little bit different. It's like a god directly appearing. It's not like, say, the spirit of Delphi, like speaking through Rachel, which we'll talk about in the next chapter when we see Rachel.
Yeah, she almost is like she's hijacked. Like, it's almost like, this is going to sound like a really old person thing to say, but it's like, do you know what a party line is, B?
Yeah.
So I guess I have to explain what a party line is. Back in the day when phones still had cords, sometimes the chords will get crossed, like when people are talking, and it almost become like a group chat of like random people conversations.
Yeah, basically the wires are getting crossed. So we don't exactly know what's going on with her or why. And I guess she took his memories hostage or something. She alludes to something about how she doesn't have a lot of power and has used a lot of her power getting him there and then trying to contact him.
Yeah, from like what they were kind of like alluding at was like she used her power to wipe his brain. I guess steal his memories. Is this like Percy Jackson and the Memory Thief?
Yeah, basically. And we'll get into Jason's memories in the next chapter as well, because I love how Annabeth immediately, I mean, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but like she's just like, well, we're gonna fix it. Like, doesn't even entertain the fact that they can't fix it themselves.
That's character growth right there, because she knows they're gonna do it.
I mean, I don't know if that's character growth. I think that's just very stubborn Annabeth of being like, well, all right, let's go.
When it's like, well, the last like 5 summers we've had like this super epic quest that we've succeeded on. Might as well go for like a 5th one or 6th one.
Let's take a shot.
Yeah, I'm not gonna waste my shot, B. Oh man. So what do you think about Jason? Because everything's just weird about him. Like everything is not what it seems to be.
Not as it seems. Yeah. I honestly don't really have a theory. I obviously know that he's involved somehow with ancient Rome as opposed to Greece, but I don't know what that means exactly. Like, are there Roman demigods that are different than Greek demigods? Is he from the past or something? Like, it's complicated because I think only from what we know, the Greek demigods have their own camp and everything. Like, I don't know. I mean, we'll kind of get into in the next chapter when they try to explain the difference between Roman versus Greek gods and how they're not exactly the same, but does that mean they have like different children too? Is that what the situation is? Is he not the child of a Greek god at all? Does that mean something else? And even Annabeth in the next chapter sort of asks him like, no, not your godly parent. She says it's your patron, which like I don't even know what that means exactly. Like your patron saint, I don't like we haven't really unpacked what that means in this context.
Well, the way that like Hera/Juno kind of talked about it was like whoever spared Jason, basically she was given him as a prize, as like almost like as an insurance policy.
Right, yeah. She said something about him being owned by her, and that's complicated. I don't really know.
Well, here's the thing again, if we're talking about ancient Rome, ancient Romans love their slaves. Oh
That's
my gosh.
True. Yeah.
And there's no way to sugarcoat that. They weren't indentured servants. They were slaves. Because I've been like really diving into like Roman mythology and Roman like society. And we'll eventually have to talk about it because it is crazy. Like there's different like hierarchies in the slave caste system to become what is called a citizen. I don't know if we'll ever talk about it.
Yeah, let's just say I'm sure ancient Rome wasn't great. It probably wasn't great. Yeah, I also sometimes forget how long Rome existed as an empire, because I mean in the next chapter we'll talk about it, where it's like they mentioned that it was around for centuries and then
poof, it burned down to the ground.
Yeah, but it's kind of interesting that like the gods existed in their Roman form almost as long as the Greek versions, and I guess that's like a facet of their personality. Again, I'm jumping ahead, so maybe we should jump to that. That
kind of reminds me that I'm going on a tangent. I've been playing Assassin's Creed Origin, which takes place in Egypt during the Roman conquest. And there's a part where like you obviously play as Egyptians, and this guy, he goes into like a ancient tomb, and his friend's like, "Hey, can you read these hieroglyphs?" And the guy's like, "I can't read those. Those are ancient."
Right.
Like, what? Like, that's to put in perspective, like...
That's how long it exists. Yeah, we have a bad understanding of time.
Even the Egyptians thought they were ancient back then, way back in the day. But yeah, so, B, what is the next chapter all about?
So into chapter 8, it's kind of a brief one. We're introduced to Rachel, who is, I guess, phrased as this redheaded girl. So now we understand that this is happening concurrently, right? Because we left off with Piper passing out, and in this case, it's Piper being carried by Annabeth and Rachel busting into the big house in the midst of Chiron being kind of cagey about the whole thing going on with Jason's memory and whatever else. And they're like, we think Piper's dead. She's not dead, but she's in kind of a coma situation. They kind of, I don't know, Rachel thinks she killed her or made her pass out or something. And then I guess what happened is both Jason and Piper met Hera / Juno at the same time. So when Piper's having that weird experience with the vision of this unnamed goddess, whatever, it's happening at the same time. So we understand that they're concurrent events and it's somehow all connected. This is sort of when they start to connect the dots, right? Like because it really does remind me a lot of like that specific trope of like you have these separate characters doing these things that kind of seem disparate, and then they come together and they're like, oh right, this kind of seems related to each other.
See, that's like the problem, like when you're like a writer, like all like if you're gonna have like a split path of things, that's like the big thing, isn't it? Like they all have to like come back to play, because then it would just be like almost like a waste of the reader's time. And that's kind of like the balance, isn't it? Like in real life, like again, I'm gonna bring up Game of Thrones. Like Game of Thrones does an amazing job at this. Like plot lines are dropped not because they should be dropped, is because like a character dies, and that's just how real life works. Like B, I'm gonna learn how to do like underwater basket throwing. Nothing will ever come of it. But like in a story, there's gonna be a part where I have to throw an underwater basket to push a button. Like things like that have to work. Yeah.
Yeah, this is when they kind of all come together and they're explaining sort of what they understand. But why use her energy to send me here? Talking about Hera / Juno, whatever, you know. Jason asked, she wiped my memory, plopped me into the wilderness school field trip, and sent you a dream vision to come pick me up. Why am I so important? Why not just send up an emergency flare to the other gods? Let them know where she is so they can bust her out. The gods need heroes to do their will down here on Earth, Rachel said. That's right, isn't it? Their fates are always intertwined with demigods. That's true, Annabeth said. But Jason's got a point. Why him? Why take his memory? And Piper's involved somehow, Rachel said. Hera sent her the same message. Free me, and Annabeth. This must have something to do with Percy's disappearing. And so they're all like babbling about like how all of these things must be connected, and they're like, all right, Chiron, what do you think? And he can't say anything, and this is kind of hurtful.
Pickpock applesauce.
Yeah, basically they say, Annabeth fixed her eyes on Chiron. Why are you so quiet, Chiron? What is it we're facing? The old centaur's face looked like it had aged 10 years in a matter of minutes. The lines around his eyes were deeply etched. My dear, in this I cannot help you. I'm so sorry. Annabeth blinked. You've never kept information from me, even the last great prophecy.
Now, B, I have a question for you. What do you think is so bad that Chiron is hiding?
I couldn't even begin to tell you. I'm sure it's very complicated. I mean, obviously he swore on the river Styx. Obviously he, I guess, knows who Jason is, because he seemed to recognize him and think that he was supposed to be dead. I don't think I could possibly guess the complicated, like, plot threads that are woven together right now. Like, it's maybe a little bit too early for me to call. It's like, I don't even know if I could begin to unpack this.
B, what is your tinfoil hat theory? You have to have one.
I mean, like, I don't know. It's like just so complicated. Obviously, Jason has some understanding of all of this. I think he must be from the past or something, because him calling the gods by their Roman names can't be a coincidence. And if he's recognizable to Chiron, that means he's met him before.
And also, remember, Chiron has lived a very, very long time.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know, he seems pretty upset that he's there. So it just the fact that he doesn't like fit in this group but still understands how the world works, it seems like he's coming from somewhere possibly in the past or something like that, which I don't exactly know how that would work. But I mean, we've had some memory erasing things happening before, i.e. with
the river and
yeah,
Bob.
with the river, and also even just like we had the case of Nico and God, I forgot. Bianca, the dead one.
the most important out of the D'Angelos, B.
Listen, we don't see her a lot. The D'Angelos, and how they don't know why if they're gods, but they kind of do, and there's like they're being shuffled around. I don't know. There's some sort of secret past that Jason has that we're not being explained, and it's kind of frustrating because I know that Chiron has some sort of information about it. I kind of feel like Annabeth, where I'm like, dude, why can't you tell us? But obviously the River Styx is kind of a big deal when you swear on it.
It's almost annoying that Rick Riordan kind of does this. When I mean by annoying, it's just like we're so used to the idea of like
right.
The camp gets attacked. Okay, I can't explain it to you right now, everybody. I'm going to be captured or something. And that you don't explain it to the 11th hour, but here you physically, the character cannot tell you, which is probably more aggravating because it's like, he can, like...
Even if he wanted to, he can't. Which, I mean, he obviously seems upset because he's like, I'll be in my office. He just kind of yeets out of there because there's nothing he can do. Anyway, so Annabeth takes things in her own hands because she's Annabeth and she's a problem solver. So she's like, all right, well, let's go over to cabin 15, which in this case is the children of Hypnos, god of sleep. And they have a lot to do with memory and I guess recovering lost memories, that kind of thing. And they meet Clovis in this extremely sleepy cabin where everyone's asleep all the time. And yeah.
Be real talk. How badly do you want to go to that cabin? Because that seems like such a good place.
I don't want to go there because I would never stop sleeping. I'm already a sleepy person. I don't need to go to the Hypnos cabin and never wake up again. It would be a real Rip Van Winkle situation. I don't need to reenact that.
Oh, I mean, doesn't Rip Van Winkle take place near your house?
Yeah, I mean, not near my house, but yes, like in the Adirondacks, not too far from me.
Yeah, I mean, when I say by near your house, I mean like 50 miles
within an
or so.
hour. Yeah.
I mean, where you live, like, I walked like 2 feet when I went hiking the one time, and there's this, oh, look, there's a Civil War battlefield. Oh, look, there's a Revolutionary War battlefield. I'm seeing a trend here.
Yeah.
There's always history.
Exactly. You know how Rip Van Winkle was real?
And this is where George Washington did his morning stretches.
Hey, at least, I mean, we do have Sybil Ludington, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, the Sybil Ludington statue in gigantic cemetery. Yeah, I love that. Okay, continue. I'm sorry, B. I got distracted because I want to talk about how cool Hypnos cabin is because I love it.
So, Hypnos cabin, everyone's taking a nice nap in an extremely cozy cabin, but they wake up Clovis, who I guess, for a really sleepy guy, has a lot of insight, surprisingly. He can't recover Jason's memory. They try. He kind of passes out, which, I mean, they're already on the border of passing out. They keep yawning. It's like a very sort of lulling presence this cabin has. Even Annabeth says, oh, it has that effect on everyone. It reminds me a lot of like the poppies will put them to sleep scene in The Wizard of Oz. It's very like,
the poppy field.
If you linger too much, you're going to take a nap, which also I think I made that same comparison to the Lotus Hotel, but it's the comparison stands.
Hey, Frank L. Baum did a good job of making things go to sleep.
It's true. So anyway, they're able to snap Clovis out of it long enough for him to kind of explain some things like, well, first of all, Jason's memories aren't recoverable. They're not just hidden. They've been stolen and taken somewhere, which is, I guess, a thing you can do in this universe.
B, and the nerd equivalent is, whoops, your iOS or your operating system's broken. You have to reinstall it. You don't have the disk because your computer doesn't have a disk for it. Sorry about that, everybody.
Yeah, there's nothing in there, basically. So he kind of explains that there's this stuff called, I think it's like Leith, which is the name of the river that can erase your memory, which is what happened with the Titan Bob, if we recall. And if you dip a poplar branch into that, it creates this substance that can erase your memory. But that's not it. Even that is not what happened to Jason. It specifically was Hera, Juno, whatever, who swooped in, took his memory, and she's the only one who will give it back. And then this is when Clovis does a brief explanation of the differences between the Greek and the Roman gods, which we talked about a little bit. So essentially, they didn't just change name. There's some specific gods that only exist in Roman culture, and even ones that have counterparts. In this case, Hera/Juno, she's not exactly the same type of god. He explains that they're more warlike, more disciplined. They're about conquering and power. That if he met Hera, he would hope that she was more in a Hera mood than a Juno mood, is what he says. And Jason gets defensive, actually, about Roman gods in this instance and says, oh, well, discipline is good. And he has this like impulse to defend them. So again, this is hinting that he might literally be from Rome or something. He just feels a very strong cultural connection and a defense mechanism to want to say, oh, no, well, the Roman gods are also good because, discipline has its place. And so that's what's making me think that there's something about him literally maybe being from ancient Rome, because that's like the level of dedication he seems to have to this idea, despite the fact he can't remember who he is. And I guess that's basically it in this chapter. We kind of like leave off on that.
So what you're telling me, B, is Jason's live for the Legion, die by the Legion. Love it.
Basically, despite the fact that he doesn't even know who he is and he doesn't really remember why he is involved with Hera at all.
Yeah, no, totally. And it's weird because as we look at this and we're talking about like the equivalents, like when it comes to like Roman gods compared to Greek gods, okay, I said before, like they're very like the Greeks and the Romans were. The Romans loved everything, while the Greeks loved the imperfections and things. Like Romans loved perfection. B, if I wanted to go almost one for one, like we have Athena. Now, what would be the Roman counterpart?
Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't. I don't know enough about mythology.
It's Minerva. The difference between both of them is they basically do the same thing, except Minerva's more of like a lot like Artemis in the sense like she's a maiden for life and like she's more super duper aggressive, whereas Athena's more like laissez-faire.
Well, right. I mean, Clovis explains this in the example of Hypnos versus Somnus, right? Where he says,
oh yeah, well, like if you go to sleep as Somnus, you die because it's like guards falling asleep on watch. Right.
He said, that's true, but the Roman gods weren't very friendly. For instance, my dad Hypnos, he didn't do much except sleep in Greek times. In Roman times, they called him Somnus. He liked killing people who didn't stay alert at their jobs. If they nodded off at the wrong time, boom, they never woke up. He killed the helmsman of Aeneas when they were sailing from Troy. Nice guy, Annabeth said.
Yeah, really nice guy. Like, he's the person I want to bring at birthday parties. He's the absolute best. And I see, it's weird because, like, as we look at this, like, you can see the similarities between Greek culture and, I mean, obviously we're alluding to something very Roman, so there's going to be those similarities because it's funny to say this, like, I keep saying this, but it's like, Romans just were really gaga. They were stands of the Greeks in many ways, except for one very important thing, B. You know what that was?
What?
They absolutely hated the sea. Like, they didn't really have a navy. They conquered by land, not by sea. So, whereas the Greeks were more of like...
Well, Greece is more surrounded by water, I guess.
It's an island. They're pretty much islands, yeah. Whereas Rome is like in the middle of like Italy. So they're like, yeah, we're gonna walk on foot, everybody. That's all I gotta say about that, because it's hard because we have this interesting conversation where, again, I've talked about it before. When it comes to Jason, he's pretty much the YA fear of losing one's identity. Like, who are you? And like, what if you lose your memory? Will you still be the same person? I always think of the BuzzFeed article.
Spoiler alert for a very old book series at this point. What happens to... I'm just gonna say it. It's a Hunger Games spoiler, but come on, guys. The prequels are out now, so just deal. When Peeta gets hijacked and he forgets who he is, it's kind of like a similar thing. Not exactly. It's not like he's evil or like been manipulated for a bad purpose, but it's kind of like, it's always interesting to have a protagonist who's like, I guess, not a reliable narrator, or he's not quite unreliable either. He remembers some things, and it doesn't seem like he has ill intent. If anything, Leo and Piper have just as much to hide, whether it be like Piper's vision and sort of secret deal that she made, or Leo hiding the fact that he can summon fire from his hands. So like, it's not exactly like he's the only one at fault here.
What I like about this as well is like with our three main characters right now is they're very all neutral. Like, there aren't like, if I'm looking at like the character like chaotic scale, like they're all like dead neutral. They all have baggage, which I like so much. Like, we're so used to like Percy Jackson being very neutral in every sense of like, he doesn't know anything, goes to camp and figures out who he is. Whereas you have a character like Leo who already knows he has fire powers and something magical has happened to him. Where we see Piper, she knows she has something magical happening to her. And we have Jason who kind of remembers, like, he has like a tattoo, like he has like all these weird things. Like, the more that I think about like when it comes to Jason, he's more of an enigma because even like Annabeth is like, what is with your sword? It's not bronze, it's gold. Like there's like weird things, but like also at the same time, like you said before, like he defends the Roman gods, and you have like all these people have like all these mysteries, which to a kid, like when you're this is a page turner, isn't it? Like where it's like you want to know all the answers, but yet you're denied all of them at the beginning of this book, even though this is supposed to be a sequel trilogy where you're supposed to know all the answers from the beginning and you're just supposed to add upon them.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's funny because we know some answers, and in a lot of ways we know a lot of pre-established things that we're just introducing to these characters, right? We know what's going on at Camp Half-Blood. We know who Chiron is. We know who Percy is. We know the entire thing that happened with the Titan War, what happened to various counselors and campers who died. Like, there's a lot of established stuff that if you read the old series, then you know what happened. But then there's this other stuff that we don't know, or like only certain characters know until they're introduced. Like, for example, the situation with Rachel, where of course we know who she is, but she has to individually be introduced to these three characters.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing about it, isn't it? Like we're introduced to these new characters and we're supposed to like them off the bat. But I think it's almost like a leap of faith as well when it comes to Rick Riordan, because the leap of faith is we have to like these new characters and kind of like push the old characters that we fell in love with to begin with almost to the side. Like that is such a huge leap of faith, and so far for me it's working. Like I like all the characters who they are currently.
No, yeah, I'm fascinated by them. I think that they're not like I mean, I hate the phrase Mary Sue or whatever, but they're not perfect, you know what I mean? They have complicated things going on, but they're also not like so insufferable but that I can't stand them, because that can also, if you're trying to like make a complicated character, sometimes you can make them so unlikable that they're not interesting to follow. But all of them have like this really nice balance of like I'm hoping they turn out okay and I'm rooting for them, but I know that there's a lot of secrets in their past and maybe they haven't done the best things. I mean, I kind of makes sense. They are demigods and they tend to sort of quote unquote be problem children or whatever, be kind of, you know, struggling in one way or another.
I've always been in the wheelhouse that said what makes a really good character is the conflicts that define them. And that's kind of like when it comes to this, is that I like that their conflicts are very much who they are as people. It isn't like they were on the bus that exploded and they lost their parents and they're orphans. No, they already have pre-existing baggage in this way. Like Piper has dad issues. Leo has, you know, problems because he lost his mom. He doesn't know really what to do. Jason is just a person. Maybe he's out of time. Maybe he's lost his identity, but he's trying to like reclaim that. And those are like such human emotions that it's almost dare I say unfathomable to think that this is in a kid's book almost, or I guess this is a YA book, so it's a little different.
Yeah, right. Well, that's another thing too, is that I really do sense the difference in genre, but I'm kind of liking it more. It feels more in depth. Like I don't know. I hate to say that I'm being condescended to when I read like Percy Jackson, because it's for kids and it's trying to be at that reading level. It doesn't like want to be above that. I understand that. But this is kind of like a really nice balance, because I do like, you know, children's lit and YA, but this still has like a little bit more like morally complicated, mature themes.
The best way to put it is Percy Jackson's like, for some reason I'm about to say the Titanic, like when the Titanic like hit the iceberg, they only saw the top of the iceberg. Think of it as Percy Jackson books. Now we're looking at Heroes of Olympus, where you're getting more into the characters' like well-being and kind of like you know, who they are as people. Because again, you can swing a sword all day long. What I love in stories is when you have people talking rather than fighting, in the sense of let's have a conversation, let's explore what it means to be a demigod. And I feel like when it comes to Heroes of Olympus, you're getting that. Like that's the real meat of Heroes of Olympus, is the human problems. Like it's I've said this before. It's like what I love about Percy Jackson, I love about the King Killer Chronicles is that they're human problems on the backdrop of fantasy, and I love that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, because I don't want to like crap on Percy Jackson necessarily, but I mean that over time, I think I really grew to appreciate those characters and I felt attached to them. And I think even the writing got more complex and better. But I certainly, I guess it's sort of twofold, where I'm already invested in this world from reading Percy Jackson. And also I just feel like this strikes a chord with me more suddenly. Like it's not taking me a longer time to feel like invested in these characters, I think, because they're so morally complicated and there's just so much going on. And maybe because it's like an ensemble cast too. Like there's these three characters who have their own disparate stories that are related, but they're their own sort of personal journeys.
Now, when it comes to it, do you think that is because Rick Riordan evolved as a writer? Like, this is his sixth. Actually, he's written more books, but I'm just saying in the Percy Jackson series, this is technically his sixth book, and he's kind of grown in that way?
Maybe. I think it's probably a few things. It's probably a little bit growing as an author and getting more comfortable writing in this world. It's also like this, because he's written in this world so much prior to this series, it feels like more lived in and established, and I don't know, it just like it has a more interesting lore to it, I guess. There's just something about the beginning of Percy Jackson that's like a little simplified, and like you've talked about, like the sort of like the whimsy of the introductory chapter of or I guess like the introductory chapters of Lightning Thief, because the beginning is a little bit intense with him like
What's going on, guys?
Whatever, but right, but like after that, just sort of being like, oh wow, look how amazing this world is. Well, we've sort of like already built up the world of Percy Jackson and then dismantle it. We've discussed that there were problems with it. Percy takes this opportunity to make like a big like deal with the gods to change how things function. So it's kind of like cracked open the world and made you like question the motivations of the gods, the motivations of the demigods. And I think when you already have that established when you're going into this series, it just feels like richer and more complicated.
And the one thing I was like thinking about, especially like I've been thinking about this a lot, is kind of like not the similarities between J.K. Rowling and Rick Riordan, but like the way that like J.K. Rowling structured her series, you grow up with the characters, whereas Percy Jackson he like grows up super fast. There isn't like that subtle like year. Yes, there is the year by year thing, but now that we're like technically like 6 years into the series, and you're seeing them more as from 11-year-olds up to about actually 13-year-olds, because Harry Potter's 11. You see them more mature into being more teenagers and like having the teenage problems rather than the kids' problems. As much as like J.K. Rowling does a good job at that,
right,
what
this
I like
starts
about
off at that.
It starts off
that's
at
what
that,
you're
and
saying.
I think
right, exactly. You're not like starting with like kid stuff where things seem innocent, and then gradually over time you're like looking at these like scraggly teens with scars on their face and like they're sweaty and they're covered in dirt to indicate that things have gotten more intense, which is kind of like, have you ever seen like where they condense all the scenes of Harry Potter into like color palettes and you see how it physically gets
turns
darker?
blacker? Yeah.
But I feel like this, you never get the luxury of like the whimsy or like the lightheartedness of being like, look at this magical camp. It immediately seems more intense.
For me, I'm going to use the Ryan Johnson term here. They're subverting expectations because Jason comes to see Chiron in this chapter. And in Percy Jackson would have made this huge deal and it would have had these flowing paragraphs explaining who Chiron is and all the heroes, rather than like when it comes to Jason, yeah, he's half horse, half man. Yeah, let's move on. We already got this. Like, looking at this again, we have to look through this from the perspective as a person that's read all of Percy Jackson and now they're reading Heroes of Olympus, and a person has never read Percy Jackson Heroes of Olympus. You're still getting the same effects. There's just a different coat of paint on them, and they're moving on in such a different way that I think it's almost a breath of fresh air sometimes, because we're so used to like, at least when it comes to any series sequel stuff, is like, remember this? Oh yeah, you remember the training ball in Star Wars? Or here it's like, that's just the universe. It isn't like Rogue One where it's just Star Wars fan film on like soup, like giving it like a 10-pound sack of like sugar to like a 4-year-old with a super soaker. Like, it isn't gonna spray that super soaker everywhere. It's just gonna happen. And I really appreciate what Rick's doing with this, because I understand like these characters are more mature, they all have problems, and that's what makes it interesting. Now the real conflict is, how are they going to overcome their problems and their griefs? I think that's the million drachma question. So B, on a lighter note, do you want to read some listener emails?
I sure do. We got a few emails this week. First one is from Ava Noel, who says, "Hi, I'm Ava Noel, age 12 from Utah, and I'm sending this Iris message to tell you that I love your guys' podcast. I was looking for something to listen to while I did my homework, and I found this podcast. It makes me smile every time I listen to it. I've already read the books, and it's funny to listen to me predict like the exact thing that is going to happen. Hey, thanks. Sometimes I'm very off, though. Thank you guys for this awesome podcast. Sorry if this is long. No, you believe me, it is not." Thank you, Ava.
B, you know what the most blessing thing is about doing the
What?
show is? I have a very
What?
terrible poker face, so I am so happy that we do this without like video chat. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we don't do this with video. Oh well, it's good we don't do this with video because sometimes I'm like in like a tank top, like I'm very warm recording and I look like a sweaty mess. So you can just hear my voice and pretend I don't look like a mess right now.
B, I wouldn't care. We're both sweaty messes. Like it's
true.
fine. Like
yeah, well, you like record inside of like
a hot box
closet. That's gradually baking you alive. So I guess I shouldn't judge.
B, your sweatiness is my sweatiness. We can be sweaty together. Like, have you seen our plague hair?
No, I don't. That doesn't sound good.
Oh, yeah, I guess so. Thank you so much for that lovely, lovely email. B, are you ready for the next one? It has an interesting subject line. Are you ready for this?
Yes.
Are you Neil Gaiman? I mean, I don't think I am. Unless secretly it's a Neil Gaiman plot device, or Neil Gaiman doesn't think that he is Neil Gaiman.
That would be like a real Hannah Montana situation if I was going to Bard while also teaching at Bard.
I mean, I wish that it was Neil Gaiman, because have you ever heard that guy read an audiobook? That guy could read the phone book. He's so charming.
I was about to joke and say I wouldn't be thrilled to be married to Amanda Palmer, but then again, I don't think Neil Gaiman is either.
So I have this one that says, "Hey, Zach, I don't really think you're Neil Gaiman. Oh, I just wanted to get your attention and hope it worked. You know what?
I think it does. I mean, we do read pretty much every email eventually, so you'd probably get our attention regardless.
You get our attention, but I mean, that was an eye catcher. I won't lie about that. I really enjoy your podcast. I love the Percy Jackson series since I was young. It's always been one of my favorite worlds and sparked my love for mythology. It also inspired me to conduct research on the novel American Gods by Neil Gaiman this semester. I'm a rising senior in uni. It's interesting to relive the PGO series, a world I grew up and loved wholeheartedly. Through an analytical perspective, I've only just started listening, currently in the middle of seeing monsters, but I'm also excited that we have such a long journey ahead of us. B, you have no idea what you're in for. Keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, so you're probably not going to hear this if you're not caught up, but eventually, Rachel, you will, not Rachel Elizabeth Dare, different Rachel, will hear this.
We don't know that. Can we assume every Rachel is just Rachel?
Yes, maybe you are Red after all, and that your last name in this email is a pseudonym. But regardless of who you are, thank you for listening to the podcast, and I hope you hear this eventually.
Speaking of Neil Gaiman, B, American Gods is such a fun book. Do not read it if you're a kid, because it is.
Yeah, no, it's not.
It's a culture shock. I'll
children.
let you guys.
I haven't read it, but from what I understand, it is not for kids. Not to I don't like to police what kids read or whatever, and the whole Maurice Sendak, if it's true, tell them kind of thing, but just like a heads up, probably not your speed yet if you're 12.
Well, what I'll say about that, B, is kind of like Percy Jackson is written in such a way that when you actually read a very blunt way of what mythology is, it becomes a culture shock. And that's the best way to put it. It is not what you think it's going to be. Though, if you want a really good book by Neil Gaiman, Norse mythology is basically his own recollections of that.
As well, yeah.
It is
I know that
phenomenal.
Sarah has a copy of that.
I have one. It's signed by Neil Gaiman. I went to his talk about it.
That'd be interesting to read that and then read Magnus Chase, because from what I understand, that's Norse as well, right?
Yes, it is, and I love it. Unfortunately, it's not Leif Erikson Day, or I'd wish happy Leif Erikson Day to everybody.
I mean, would anybody know the difference? Probably not. So our next email, subject line, asking about future podcast episodes after Heroes of Olympus. From Prajwal JR, who says, I became a big fan of both Zach and B. Will you ever read Kane Chronicles and Magnus Chase, who are of the same universe, and definitely people will love if you read them too, and crossovers of Percy Jackson and Kane Chronicles. Please, it's a request from a huge fan of Rick Riordan and Percy Jackson universe and your podcast. I think you will fulfill my request from your loving friend Prajwal VR from India. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Maybe eventually. We just started this, so it's
gonna be a while, guys.
It's gonna be a while, regardless. Minimum, a couple years, probably. Listen, we don't like to do the math because it's you're really looking down that barrel, and you can't really see the light at the end of the tunnel. But
I'm just going to assume that we're done by next week. That's just how I keep
right,
going.
Yeah, we could if we suddenly read the entire book and then just recorded successively for like a month straight or something. But no, I don't think we're going to do that.
So no, what we do is we record like one really long episode, and what we do is we condense it to 3 seconds. So if you slow it down,
just be like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, probably. But still, if you listen closely, you would hear Zach saying Star Wars really fast.
No, or be like Star War if it's like slowed down.
Only if you play it backwards.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, we're not really on a plan yet as far as what we're going to read next, because we really did just start this series, and as it stands, we're only on the first book. So we'll figure out when we get closer to that. I'm sure we'll eventually read a lot of like the main Rick Riordan, Percy Jackson related books before we maybe eventually get on to Rick Riordan Presents books, whether that's going to be bonus content or whatever. We're going to figure that out in the future. But for now, we're going to do Heroes of Olympus, and we'll get back to you.
Yes, I am excited when we get to those books. I'd love to do King Chronicles. I'd love to do Magnus Chase and Trials of Apollo. Fun fact, B, it was just announced this week. Are you ready for this? Are you sitting down? Of course you're sitting down.
Yes, I hope not. Yeah, I hope I'm not standing and recording.
So Trials of Apollo is the last in the Camp Half-Blood Chronicles. Wow. Meaning that, is there going to be more Percy Jackson?
Probably
I don't
not.
know. Who knows what's going to happen? Because the next book series after this is Irish mythology, and I'm actually really excited to read that. So, B, I have an email, and it's called Diversity in the PGO Disney Plus series. You ready for this?
Yep.
So this one's from James. I was thinking about the new PGO series coming out on Disney Plus, and I started making lists of ways we could diversify the cast. I would love to hear your guys' input on this. 1, I think it'd be interesting if they casted Luke as biracial, as his mother as African American. This could add another level of depth to his character as well as giving more biracial representation. 2, make Clarice and Selena a couple. Maybe we could get rid of the relationship between Selena and Beckendorf, emphasizing the relationship between Selena and Clarice. Maybe we could get a declaration of love as maybe Selena dying. This would add more drama to the fight with the dragon. 3, I would like to see some of the other gods be other races as well. Aphrodite already has it covered, but it would be really nice if maybe Hermes was Mexican-American, though that might mess up things with Luke again, and possibly Artemis as an Asian woman. 4, I also see Zoe Nightshade as being Asian, but this might not work if Artemis is already Asian. Not because there can be too many Asians, but because it might be a stereotype the Hunters of Artemis as being a group of Asian girls. 5, a trans character. I'm not sure who exactly it could be, as we don't have any trans characters in PGO or Heroes of Olympus. This could be good for diversity. 6, other side characters could be more detailed. I have a few ideas in mind, but I would love it if you could contribute any ideas. From James. P.S. I love the show. Can't wait to get to Redacted here, which is my favorite of the Heroes of Olympus books.
We sort of talked about this on our great big crossover ep with all of the other Percy Jackson podcasts, but basically, I don't really want them to change too much of the plot to then make it diverse necessarily. Like, I think the casting should be diverse, and that's entirely fine. Like, I think that makes a lot of sense to have like race blind casting for a bunch of the different characters. As for like straight up change in the plot wherein Selena and Beckendorf aren't together, I feel like that isn't a really important thread. It's about a loss of innocence, and his death is a really big deal. So I think that would change the story too much for it to make sense. I think they could also hint at maybe Selena and Clarice having some sort of chemistry between each other, but I think deleting Beckendorf's whole plot entirely isn't maybe necessary. I mean, I don't know. You could make characters bi too. Like, you don't need to sort of like delete him in order for that to work. You know what I mean? Like, it's not mutually exclusive. There's just like certain things I wouldn't want them to get rid of for the sake of being like, oh, now we're diverse. As far as a trans character, I don't know if there would be like space in the plot. I mean, obviously, as a trans person, I'm like invested in that kind of representation, but I think, you could cast a trans actor and they could play any character you want, and they don't need to mention that they're trans or not. It's just, they could be a trans actor playing I don't know. There's nothing in the plot saying that certain characters aren't trans.
See, the way that I look at like diversity in any form of media is more of like, the way that I look at it is diversity is a very important thing. It's something that, we're finally getting to talk about finally. Though when it comes to diversity, that should be like, you shouldn't have to worry about, oh, I'm casting so-and-so to be so-and-so because in the book it's like this. It should be more of like, yes, this is the character, we need to believe in them because that is who they are. It shouldn't be necessarily about race in the sense of like, if they're a good actor, they should get the role. What I'll say about like when it comes to like the Selena and Clarice thing is like, yeah, you can have, bi characters. Like, I think what you said is actually, you actually took the words right out of my mouth. It's like, we should not change a plot element for the sake of diversity in the sense of like, it worked so well in the book. Why should we change it?
You don't need to change that also. Cause I think bi representation works just as well in that case. And then it wouldn't be at the detriment of the plot of I think that Beckendorf existing and dying the way he did makes sense. You know what I mean? Or, you could make Beckendorf a girl, I guess, also.
Well, that also kind of erases another thing, too. It's like you have, because Selena, I think in the book, is supposed to be a very white person, and Charlie is supposed to be an African-American.
Yeah, is he canonically black? Yeah, so that's another thing, too, is like deleting a black character for the sake of making a character newly queer for representation kind of doesn't feel comfortable for me either. Like, you could have both.
Well, there's also then you're like erasing like kind of like
one representation for another.
Biracial. Well, yeah, you're erasing one representation for another, but you're also kind of erasing like couples that are not just
like
white
mixed race
people.
Yeah.
Like there's like a lot of things, like there are a lot of working parts when it comes to like diversity. I mean, that's what people like try to talk about a lot, is like there's a lot of like working parts when it comes to then it's a very complicated matter. Like, we could talk about this all day. Like, for me,
I think we're pretty much on the same page about this.
Yeah. I think what we'll say about this is a very good list. We really appreciate you sending this to us.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all we're going to say is like, I think Rick Riordan and their team, when it comes to Disney Plus, we're going to see what's going to be happening with that. And that's kind of like, do we want this? Maybe there might be a completely different, interpretation that they want to perceive about it. Who knows? I would like to see what they're going to be doing with that. I think even though when it comes to the Hunters of Artemis, they wouldn't all be like necessarily, if Artemis was Asian, that also would work in like the sense of like the plot element of like Artemis takes in a bunch of other people.
Right, yeah, well, the Hunters of Artemis wouldn't all have to be the same race, right? Because they all elect to be a part of Hunters of Artemis. They're not like, or even demigods. Demigods don't all look the same. We've established that just because they're quote unquote related doesn't mean they look the same. So that doesn't even rule out, the fact that we could have an incredibly diverse Camp Half-Blood with all sorts of gods looking all sorts of ways and all the campers looking all sorts of ways. We've established in this very book, when Leo goes to the Hephaestus cabin, that despite the fact that they all are children of Hephaestus, they don't look the same.
No, they're all siblings, but yet at the same time, they are all unique in many different ways.
They're not related in the same human way that people are related. So it's like, it really opens the world up as far as diversity is concerned, especially like racially diverse. But like, again, there could definitely be trans characters without writing in a trans plot, because I feel like there just like isn't enough space in a TV show to do that, to like retroactively add that.
And I'm not sure. Maybe I'm about to say something, but I'm not sure. I was gonna say it's like, if we add like a trans character in that sense, it's like, I think it'd be more disrespectful to have like you have to have the episode of them saying I'm trans.
Right, exactly. Because also like trans people are,
they just want to be themselves.
Normal people, exactly. Yeah, like we don't need another coming out story necessarily, like them just existing as trans in a universe, and like it's not even spoken about. That's kind of like ideally a world that we're moving towards. And obviously I think that there's a place for all sorts of diversity where you can have stories that specifically talk about what being trans means, but it's also kind of nice to imagine this magical world where trans people can also just be characters, and they can be, you know what I mean? They don't need to explain why they're trans, just like how a person of color doesn't need to explain why they're not white. You know what I mean? They could just exist in that world as people.
We've moved past that part, because I've read many books from the late 2000s, even up to the mid 2010s, where you have
right.
Like,
we need something more than a coming out story.
Yeah, no, where it's like exactly like that, where like a character's personality shouldn't be necessarily based on like their sexuality or their race. That should be like that should just be like a part of their characteristics. Like, okay, I'm trans, but that doesn't, I'm still a person at the same time.
Exactly. So that's kind of where we're at with this. I mean, it would be really cool if, when Rick Riordan wrote this series, there was already characters who were like trans or like whatever variously acknowledged for being diverse in one way or another, but that obviously it was written during a different time. He did obviously add trans characters in Magnus Chase, for example. So like it's, there's the possibility for that being adapted one day, who knows? So like that's kind of like where I'm at with that.
I think also the most important thing as well is that now that Rick Riordan's going to be heavily involved in here, he's going to be up for bat. Like if they want to change any of that stuff, because there's always that studio meddling. Like he's the voice of the community in the sense.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that there is some sort of like queer representation, because that would be like nice in a Disney program, like we talked about on the sort of round table, where like is some representation in Disney Plus. So I don't know, we'll see.
B, did you get a chance to watch Out yet?
I have not.
It made me cry.
So yeah,
it was really
the person
good.
who sent this email, maybe take a listen to our roundtable episode as well if you haven't gotten to that, because we talk a little bit more about representation, how we feel. Because yeah, we're on similar pages, but not quite the same.
James, we're like on very similar wavelengths, and we like that. So keep up the good work. B, do you have an email?
So we have one more email that says, "Hey yo, 'tis I, the most annoying emailer." No, don't say that. Hi again. Just finished listening to Piper Gets Armed. I'm not really emailing because I just listened to your episode so much as I finished my 15th book this quarantine, but yeah. Oh, and since people are emailing about their favorite characters in Heroes of Olympus series, mine's Leo. Right back to my main reason for emailing, I like suggest reading the Wingfeather Saga. It's a really good series by Andrew Peterson. That's all I really had to say, and sorry for the long email. Keep horsing around. It's so funny that when people say sorry for the long email, they almost never send a really long email. But regardless, thank you, William. I'll try to get to your recommendation. I will be totally honest and say I'm very bad at following through with book recommendations, because I'm bad at reading things unless I have to.
Like I've been in a deep dive of like rereading books, because I'm trying to reread all of the Dresden Files. There's like 15 books right now, because I want to read the new one that comes out in July. Like half of my reading list was actually alleviated a little bit, because I'm like, I'll hold off on some of these books, and I'll add that, because I think I've seen those covers before in the kids section. I think they're the dragon books, if I'm correct. If not, I'll put it on my reading list. That's something I'll add. B, do you want to read some iTunes reviews?
Yeah, we got a good amount. One says, 5 stars, best podcast ever. I love this podcast. I only started listening yesterday and already loving it. I just finished reading Percy Jackson, so this podcast was amazing. Could you do one about Heroes of Olympus? You're listening to it right now.
Oh my gosh.
My favorite chapter is I Get Dumped, Persibeth, parentheses. Highly recommend this to any PJO fan. From Mia, age 9. Wow. In Auckland, New Zealand. Hi, adding on to this, say thank you so much for starting on about Heroes of Olympus. It is so entertaining. You guys are amazing. Oh, so you updated this because you found out we did Heroes of Olympus. Thank you. All right. So yes, you're aware that we're doing this now. So I hope you're listening. I hope you're enjoying.
Yeah, that's amazing. Mia. Oh, thank you so much, Mia.
Different Mia than my co-host. She's not 9.
Or is this like the Neil Gaiman situation? Have you ever seen this Mia and the other Mia in the same place? Woo-wee-oo.
No. I've never seen Mia in any place because we've never seen each other in person.
I can say she is not a 9-year-old girl.
I hope not. That would be weird.
I mean, this sounds like the plot of an anime.
Well, also considering the content of her tweets, sometimes that would be very bad if that was a 9-year-old.
Okay, so I have one that says awesome. This is Noah, a Ravenclaw and child of Athena. My cue is, what would you do if you were in the final battle? As B knows, and what side would you be on, and what weapon would you use later?
I never know how to answer these, because it's like, what kind of weapon would I want? I mean, like, I was okay at archery when I was in high school, so maybe that. I don't know. What side would I be on? I mean, obviously, the demigods side. What am I going to be on the side of Kronos? I don't think so. I hate Luke so much, so that would never happen. I can't say that I wouldn't find Percy annoying too, but it is what it is.
I don't even really know what type of weapon I would use, because I feel like I'd go for like a sword, but at the same time, like I have like a love.
I feel like I'm too short to use a sword. Like, I don't think it would be very beneficial for me to use a sword.
B, I have such a dumb love for the idea of like a ball and chain, like a not a morning star, but
like a flail. A flail, yeah.
Like I just think that's such
a mace. What is that?
No, a mace is different. Like it's just
Sure, one of those old-timey weapons. I mean, sure, that I would be so bad at that, I wouldn't be able to lift it. So yeah, I think...
what would happen for you is like you'd start swinging it, and then like you try to hit someone, you just go flying with it because of the weight distribution.
No, absolutely, that's what would happen. There's no way I could wield something like that. I'm way too small.
And then side demigods, because why would I not be on the demigod side?
Yeah, really? Luke? Come on, get out of here. Gross. Next review says, 5 stars, you guys are awesome. Just wanted to say, I listened to your latest episode and just want to say that I loved it. I laughed out loud because you said a dolphin on fire. Did we say that? Who knows what we say?
Oh no, because I said that dolphin's on fire.
Oh yes, now I remember. Yeah. See, words just come out sometimes. I think Leo is a great character because of his sad backstory. Keep doing what you're doing. It's true, he has a sad backstory, but unlike Luke, isn't the worst, so...
Leo has a really interesting backstory, and I can't wait for us to explore it. Again, I love character studies, so we'll explore it. This week we did get weird tweets because people were like, what did I listen to last week with the uwoos?
Oh, yeah, listen. Okay, it's an inside joke. I know the uwoos make people... It sort of sets off their fight or flight. I understand. That's why it's funny to me, because it's so cringy.
All I gotta say is my friend made the best one this week, and she was like, I gotta get milk. Gotta get some moo-woo.
Oh no, that's okay. Anyway, sorry for the uwoos, but I personally find them hilarious.
Oh, I think they're hilarious. Though, I don't text them in real people. Like, I don't do that. I do as a joke.
Do you want to read the last iTunes review?
I love this podcast so much. Hi, guys. I recently started listening to the series, and I'm currently listening to episode 9. I read the series when I was in 6th grade. I am from Britain, and I love the way you explained so much about the books. From Alex. Thank you so much, Alex.
So 6th year of school. Is that different than 6th grade? I just don't know.
Well, thank you guys so much for listening to another amazing episode of Radio Camp Half-Blood. B, I gotta say something. We have some of the best people in the whole world because we have doubled our downloads since the PGO. When I mean by double, I mean like I was sipping my coffee and did a spit take type of doubling.
Yeah, I haven't checked on our downloads recently, but I know that there's been sort of an uptick in listeners since the whole announcement with Disney Plus. So thank you guys for listening. I hope you're excited as we are for who knows when that series will come out. But when it does,
we'll be here.
We will discuss it.
We'll talk about it.
I hope you like the little sort of collab we did with all of the Percy Jackson podcasts, and you should check them out if you are not like me and bound by spoilers to not listen to most of them.
I do also have to give a shout out yesterday when we recorded this, so this is probably in the past now or the future or whenever this is. I got to give a big shout out to the Half-Blood Report because they did an amazing charity drive. Both of them, Samuel and Diego, nailed it and killed it with trivia. I did pretty bad because I know nothing about Percy Jackson except for very obscure things like what is the name of Percy's teacher in The Lightning Thief when Mrs. Dodds is erased? B, do you know?
Oh, I don't remember.
It's Mrs. Kerr.
Kerr. Yeah, I don't... See, let's be honest, I've only read it one time, and that was 2 years ago, so cut me some slack.
I thought that was the funniest because I had just re-listened to our first episode, so I knew what we were talking about.
Of course you would know. Yeah, exactly.
Because I had to do I call these quality tests.
I've gone through 2 different apartments, and my whole life is completely different since then, so.
Yet I can remember almost all the names of the Backstreet Boys. No, I don't. So B, where can they find you on social media?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at bkellygorman and on Tumblr at twinpoetry.tumblr.com.
If you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter at Suda41. That's SUDA41. If you want to follow our show on Twitter, that's at halfblood_radio. If you want to email the show, you can email us at radiocamphafblood@gmail.com. We're still working our way through our backlog of emails, so if you didn't hear your email, it's coming. It's just a very, very slow process. I apologize for that. We have t-shirts available at TeePublic, so just go to www.teepublic.com. We have a Patreon/RadioCampHalfBlood, so check that out. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you guys are staying safe and fighting the boredom.
Yep, yeah, at least the weather's nice.
Yep, the weather is really nice.
In most places.
Well, I'm Zach.
I'm B.
Let's keep staying mortal. See ya.
Bye, guys.